The dawn sky over Tokyo shook as Captain Hiro Takamura said, "Something is wrong. The air feels heavy," while he watched a silver glint slicing through the morning haze, and the young pilots around him whispered questions they feared to speak aloud as rumors of a new enemy plane spread like sparks on dry grass, raising doubts about everything they had been told. And he wondered if truth was finally catching up to command, because if the stories were real, then why did their leaders act as if nothing had changed? And what justice could exist if fear ruled the air? And when a sudden roar echoed over the city, he felt a chill as he realized the stories were not rumors anymore. And as the shape of the first P-51 flashed above them, he understood that this moment would tear open every lie, leaving him to ask who benefits from hiding the truth and who pays the price for believing it. Hiro watched the sky settle into uneasy quiet as the Mustang vanished beyond the low clouds, and he said, "That was no ordinary plane." While the others tried to convince themselves it was only a trick of the light. Yet the tension soaking the air refused to fade, and every heartbeat felt heavier as he wondered why command had hidden this threat. And the thought that justice demanded truth clawed at him as he imagined Kenji being sent into battle against something they barely understood, pushing him to decide whether silence served loyalty or only built a deeper trap for everyone who trusted him. Ayako hurried into the dim intelligence room, breathing hard as she said, "We were never supposed to see those reports," and her superior avoided her eyes while she sensed fear spreading through the walls like smoke, and she realized truth had been buried under layers of pride, warnings ignored to shield egos instead of lives. And as she studied the intercepted notes, she felt a cold certainty that justice now depended on someone willing to expose the hidden danger before the next wave of Mustangs arrived. Reeves guided his Mustang along the return route, the city shrinking behind him as he said quietly, "They saw us today." And his wingman's silence told him everything about the weight they carried, because he knew justice meant ending the conflict quickly while sparing as many lives as possible. Yet every mission risked harming people who had nothing to do with decisions made far above them. And he wondered if the pilots below understood that he feared becoming the monster they imagined. Kenji sat alone near the hangar, gripping a small charm from home as he whispered, "How can we fight something that fast?" And the truth hit him like a cold wave, because he realized fear did not make him weak, but honest. And he hoped someone above him would seek justice before young pilots were sent into battles they could not survive. And as the airfield quieted, he sensed change rolling toward them like a distant storm. He could neither stop nor escape. Hiro walked across the briefing yard as tension circled the pilots like unseen chains. And he said, "If command denies what we saw, they put us in danger," while officers barked orders meant to sound confident but carried cracks that revealed their fear. And he felt anger rise because justice could not survive inside walls built from silence. And every pilot deserved truth before being pushed into the sky. And when Kenji approached with shaking hands asking if the silver plane would return, Hiro sensed the weight of leadership pressing on, and he knew the next decision might break trust forever if he allowed lies to spread. And as he stared at the clouds, he wondered what price he would pay for defying orders, knowing that truth often demanded more courage than battle. And the shadow of the Mustang still haunted the air above them like a reminder that silence was no longer an option. Ayako stepped into a narrow archive room lined with dust-covered files and said, "If the truth is here, someone tried hard to bury it." While she sifted through coded reports describing sightings of strange aircraft long before today, and she felt her pulse climb as she realized command had known for weeks, but refused to warn the pilots. And justice twisted inside her like a spark touching dry paper, driving her forward even as fear tried to slow her hands. And she wondered who else had seen these papers, and why they stayed silent. Knowing every hidden page meant another life placed blindly in harm's path. Reeves flew low over distant waves as his squad regrouped, and he said, "Command wants tighter runs around the city. But his voice carried doubt because he understood that every pass increased the chance of disaster, and he hated how war twisted simple goals into moral traps. And he wondered how many pilots below feared the silver wings above them, knowing justice required seeing the enemy as human, not targets. And he wished he could tell them he carried no pride in outmatching them, only hope that ending the conflict fast would spare more families than it harmed. Kenji hurried into the maintenance hangar, searching for answers, and said, "The older pilots won't look me in the eyes," as if their silence confirmed every fear pressing on his chest. And he watched mechanics whisper to each other while pretending nothing was wrong, and he sensed a truth hidden in their nervous glances. And he realized justice meant facing reality, no matter how much it scared him. And he wondered whether stepping into his fighter would be bravery or blind obedience. And for the first time, he questioned whether loyalty should cost his life. Hiro met Ayako behind the operations building where shadows from tall antenna towers stretched across the ground, and she said, "They knew the Mustangs were coming," as she handed him the intercepted files. And he felt shock ripple through him because the pages confirmed every suspicion he carried, and justice now demanded action he could not ignore, even if it meant defying superiors. And he understood the risks, but also the cost of silence. And as the distant hum of engines drifted across the base, he sensed time running out. Knowing the truth could save lives only if spoken before fear consumed everyone. Hiro stood in the command hall where the air felt heavy with forced confidence, and he said, "If we pretend the Mustang is not a threat, we send our own pilots to fail," while officers glared as though his words carried danger. Yet he felt truth burning too fiercely to swallow, and he watched their practiced smiles crack under pressure as they dodged his questions. And justice pushed him forward, because silence now meant letting Kenji and others walk blindly into the sky. And when one officer warned him to remember his place, Hiro sensed a line had been crossed, and he knew stepping back would betray everyone who trusted him. And as murmurs spread across the room, he realized that honesty had become more explosive than any bomb. Ayako moved quickly through the courtyard, clutching the copied documents as she said, "We can't fix this alone." Knowing each step risked drawing attention, and she watched messengers rush past with orders meant to hide panic. And she felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper, because truth now rested in only a few hands, and justice demanded they warn the pilots before another Mustang sighting turned deadly. And she wondered how many lives might be saved if someone dared to speak louder than the fear gripping the base, even if that voice had to be hers. Reeves circled above the coast as he said, "We're being pushed closer to the city," and he sensed danger in Mashiach. Tenji sensed danger in how command tightened their roots, because the closer they flew, the more likely stray fire or mistakes would harm people below. And he felt frustration brewing as he thought of the young pilots staring into the sky with fear, wondering if they saw him as a monster or a warning. And he wished justice did not require hurting others to protect them, and part of him hoped someone on the ground understood that he carried no hatred, only the heavy duty to finish a fight no one wanted. Kenji listened to the older pilots whisper about the silver plane as he said, "Why won't they tell us the truth?" And he felt fear twist into anger because their quiet warnings hinted at danger far beyond what he had trained for. And he saw shame in their eyes as they avoided answering him, and justice tugged at him to demand honesty, even though his voice trembled. And he wondered if he had been chosen for his willingness to obey rather than his skill. And the thought hollowed him as he questioned whether stepping into his fighter would honor anyone if built upon lies. Hiro and Ayako met again near the fuel depot where engines rumbled in the distance, and he said, "The officers won't act, so we have to," while she handed him the list of pilots scheduled to fly the next patrol. And he felt dread move through him because the names included Kenji along with others who had never seen a Mustang, and justice pressed him to protect them, even if it meant breaking every rule. And he realized that warning them would turn him into a traitor in the eyes of command, but a guardian in the eyes of the pilots. And with the ground trembling beneath their feet, He knew the moment to choose had arrived. Hiro stepped into the ready room where pilots waited in uneasy silence, and he said, "Listen to me before you fly." Knowing every word risked his career, yet truth pushed harder than fear as he explained the Mustang's speed and climb. Details command refused to admit, and he watched shock ripple across the room as the younger pilots leaned forward, Kenji gripping the edge of his seat, and Hiro felt justice guiding him because silence now meant death. And when a senior officer burst in demanding he stop, Hiro refused to back down, realizing that protecting these pilots mattered more than any rank he might lose. Ayako slipped into the communications wing and said, "If we send a warning now, the patrol might survive," while she fed copied reports into the coded transmitter. Heart racing as footsteps echoed from the hallway, and she knew justice demanded she act before command buried the truth again. And she held her breath as the machine ticked out the message, hoping it would reach the pilots in time. And she wondered how long they could delay the officers before punishment arrived. Yet she chose action over fear, because lives depended on a single moment of courage. Reeves received new flight instructions as he said, "They want another pass over the outskirts," and he felt a knot tighten in his chest because each run carried the risk of dragging civilians into the fighting. And he studied the map, wondering why the enemy seemed unprepared, despite the threat they faced. And he sensed there was truth missing from his own briefing. And justice urged him to fly carefully, watching for signs of panic below, and he hoped the pilots on the ground had someone willing to warn them before they were thrown into an uneven fight. Kenji read the secret warning, passed quietly between pilots, and said, "Hiro is risking everything for us," as dread mixed with gratitude, because the message revealed exactly how outmatched their planes were. And he felt justice stir within him as he realized the truth gave them a chance to survive, not an excuse to panic. And he knew he had to choose whether to trust the official briefings or Hiro's courage. And the weight of that choice settled over him like cold rain, pushing him to question what honor truly meant when lives hung in the balance. Hiro and Ayako hurried along a back corridor as alarms suddenly echoed through the base. And he said, "They know we sent the warning," while she urged him to keep moving because officers were already searching for them. And he felt the pressure of justice closing in as if time itself pushed them forward, and they slipped behind a storage building just as soldiers rushed past. And Hiro realized their actions had set a chain of events in motion that could not be undone. Yet he felt no regret, only the fear that their efforts might still be too late to save the pilots preparing to take flight. Hiro reached the edge of the runway as engines roared to life, and he said, "They can't fly blind into this," while he sprinted toward the patrol lineup, knowing every second mattered because the Mustangs were already reported near the coast. And he saw Kenji fastening his straps with shaking hands, and fear stabbed through him as he imagined the young pilot facing an enemy he could not outrun. And justice pushed Hiro forward, despite soldiers shouting for him to stop, and he yelled for the pilots to use the warning Ayako had sent. Hoping they understood, he risked everything to keep them alive, and as guards closed in, he realized he might not reach Kenji in time. Ayako slipped into a maintenance shed to avoid the patrol searching for her, and she said, "If Hiro reaches them, at least the warning won't die," while she pressed her back against cold metal shelves, listening to approaching voices, and she felt fear claw at her, but forced herself to stay calm because justice required more than bravery. It required endurance, and she wondered whether the officers understood that hiding the truth now only added guilt to their own hands. And as footsteps faded, she peeked through a cracked door, hoping to glimpse Hiro, praying he had bought the pilots a fighting chance. Reeves led his squad toward the city edge as he said, "Stay sharp." Something feels off, because the air below looked restless, and he sensed movement around the Japanese airfield that didn't match the usual patterns. And he wondered if the enemy had learned about their approach, or if fear had driven them into desperate action. And justice pressed him to keep his formation steady, avoiding escalation unless forced. And he scanned the clouds, hoping the pilots preparing below knew he didn't wish to harm them. Yet he understood that that choice might not be his to make once the sky erupted. Kenji powered up his engine as ground crews waved him forward, and he said, "If Hiro risked everything to warn us, we can't ignore it," while he glanced toward the commotion near the hangars where soldiers confronted Hiro, and he felt fear shift into resolve, because justice meant using truth to survive, not pretending danger didn't exist. And he tightened his grip on the controls, wishing he could help Hiro. But the signal to launch flashed and duty pulled him toward the runway, leaving him torn between obedience and the promise he silently made to trust Hiro's courage. Hiro was forced to his knees by soldiers as engines roared past, and he said, "At least they know the truth now," while he watched the patrol lift into the sky, powerless to follow them, and he felt a mix of relief and dread because justice had been spoken, but he could not guide the pilots through the danger ahead, and he prayed they remembered every detail he had taught. And when he saw Kenji's plane rise above the haze, he felt a painful surge of pride, knowing the young pilot carried both the warning and the hope he had risked everything for. Kenji climbed through rising air currents as the city faded beneath him, and he said, "I won't freeze when they arrive," though his heartbeat thudded so loudly he felt it shake the cockpit. And he remembered Hiro's warning him about the Mustang's speed, forcing himself to breathe slow and steady, and justice echoed through his thoughts, because survival now depended on truth, not pride. And as sunlight cut across the clouds, he spotted silver flashes approaching from the west, their grace terrifying in its calm, and he realized this moment would define whether Hiro's risk had been enough to save them, or if fear would still win the sky. Reeves leveled his Mustang as he said, "Contact at 2 o'clock," while he spotted the Japanese patrol rising in a scattered pattern that revealed their panic, and he felt a twist of regret because he knew their planes couldn't match his squad's speed or climb, and justice urged moderation rather than aggression, pushing him to avoid needless shots. And he hoped the pilots below understood that he didn't want to take their lives, only force them to back off. And as his squad tightened formation, he prepared for the moment when fear on both sides could turn the sky into chaos. Hiro sat restrained in a small office as guards paced outside, and he said, "They're in the air now," while fear gnawed at him because he could no longer guide Kenji or correct any mistake the patrol might make. And he felt helpless anger rise as he imagined the Mustangs diving with impossible speed, and justice weighed heavy on his chest because he had done all he could. Yet it felt painfully small against the vast sky where the fight would unfold, and he prayed the truth he gave them would be enough to keep them alive until the storm passed. Ayako crouched behind fuel barrels near the hangars, listening to officers shout about the patrol's takeoff, and she said, "Please, let them use the warning," while her heart pounded at the thought of Kenji trying to face the Mustangs without proper guidance. And she felt guilt twist through her, knowing she had helped trigger this moment, yet could not aid them now. And justice felt fragile in her hands, like something easily crushed by fear or denial, and she wondered whether the truth would finally open Command's eyes, or if loss would be the only force strong enough to shatter their stubborn pride. Kenji saw the Mustangs break formation and said, "Here they come," as one silver shape angled toward him faster than anything he had ever seen, and he remembered Hiro's advice to dive early. So he pushed his nose down and felt his fighter shudder as air hammered the wings, and fear clawed at him. But truth kept him steady because now he understood the Mustang wasn't unbeatable. It was predictable if he stayed calm, and as he slipped beneath the enemy's pass, he sensed a spark of hope, realizing justice meant using courage and knowledge together, even when the sky felt ready to tear apart around him. Kenji steadied his breath as the sky twisted into a frantic dance of rushing engines, and he said, "I can hold them off a little longer," while he banked hard to avoid another silver streak slicing across the clouds. And fear surged through him, but he held tight to Hiro's lessons, letting truth guide him instead of panic. And he realized survival came from trusting what he knew, not trying to match the Mustang's speed. And as the enemy pilot pulled away, he felt a small victory spark inside him, proof that justice had reached him in time, even if only by seconds. and he prayed the others had heard the warning too. Reeves watched one of the Japanese fighters pull a clever dive and said, "Someone taught them well," with a mix of respect and relief, because he sensed these pilots were no longer charging blindly, and Justice eased his conscience knowing his actions might push them to retreat rather than break, and he guided his squad into a wider pattern to avoid trapping the enemy, hoping they understood he wanted the fight to end without more lives lost. And as he circled above the scattered patrol, he felt the sky shift, no longer filled with panic, but with wary understanding between two sides, trying to survive a moment neither wanted. Hiro heard distant engines through the thin office walls and said, "Kenji is still alive? I know it," while helplessness twisted through him because he could only imagine the chaos above, and he wondered if his warning had made a real difference, or if he had only delayed the danger. And justice ached inside him like a bruise, because truth had lifted doubt from the pilots but could not stop bullets. And when a guard stepped away, he leaned toward the window, searching the sky as if his eyes alone could pull the patrol home, praying every choice he made would be worth the cost. Ayako stepped from her hiding place as officers rushed toward the command hall, and she said, "They've seen the patrol signals. They know the danger now." While she felt both fear and hope twist together because the truth she helped reveal had forced the officers to confront reality, and justice stirred in her chest as she realized the base no longer moved with denial but with urgency. And she wondered whether this shift would finally save the surviving pilots, or only come too late. Yet she followed the noise toward the operations room, determined to face whatever came next. Kenji broke from the fight as Reeves pulled his squad away, and he said, "They're letting us go," stunned by the sudden calm settling over the clouds, and he felt relief rush through him like warm wind, because justice had found its place in the sky, carried by truth instead of fear. And he turned toward the airfield with shaking hands, knowing Hiro and Ayako had risked everything to make this moment possible. And as he descended through the golden haze, he wondered how much had changed on the ground, and whether courage born from honesty could reshape a world built on secrecy and pride.